Hi, my name is Michelle Lewis. I am a licensed clinical social worker and I own Salt Lake Weight Counseling. I started recognizing the relationship that we have with food when I was working in a corporate wellness program. I worked with weight management clients who really struggled with patterns of self-sabotage. And I used my background in substance abuse to help target that relationship with food that was creating the pattern of self-sabotage. In today's video, I will talk about the physiology of stress, how it impacts our relationship with food, and some things that we can do about stress to help limit that interaction between stress and food. So we are going to start today with talking about why we stress eat. We'll just do kind of a basic overview and then I'll go into more detail. It actually increases neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemicals in our brain. So when we have different metabolic processes go on in our body, we use hormones. Well, hormones in our brain are called neurotransmitters. It's just what creates change in our body and helps our body communicate with the different organs and different things that need to happen. We also have a conditioned response. So what happens in our brain when we have stress and then we go to eat a cookie, we actually create a connection in our brain that wasn't there before. Every time we go back to that cookie when we're stressed, it furthers that connection. So it strengthens it, much like going to the gym and lifting weights. This, by and large, is why diets don't work, because we don't break that brain connection with food. And then also there are some powerful positive pieces that come with stress eating. So it makes us feel better. It allows us to avoid things. We actually feel calm and peace on a biological level. And so we'll go into all of these things in more detail today. So the first section we'll talk about here is the brain. So if you look at this picture, there are a few structures that we're going to be talking about today. We have the ventral tegmental area, so the VTA, which is really just a group of neurons in our brain. It's not a structure in and of themselves, but it's a group of neurons, which are cells in our brain that are communicating and performing a function there. So this is particularly involved in our reward circuitry. So you may have heard of the reward center or the pleasure center in our brain, and this is one of the key pieces of this. This is also where we learn motivation, cognition. So cognition is our ability to think, and addiction behavior. So those three things together you become motivated for the addiction behavior based on the pleasure that you're feeling. So next we have the nucleus accumbens, which is also part of that reward center. So we have pleasure, reward, and then reinforcement and learning. So what we find early on is that we feel something good, and then we try and recreate that over and over again. And in rat studies, not that I advocate rat studies, but rats will press a lever up to 2,000 times an hour to get that reward center stimulated, and everything else goes by the wayside, even crying babies. What we also see is this is where an increase of dopamine, which we'll talk about in a moment, is released in the brain. So these three areas kind of work together, but also work against each other, because if you look at my hand here, this would be the reward center, so the nucleus accumbens and the VTA, and another structure which we'll talk about in a minute, which is a more primitive form of our brain. So that was formed early on in life. Well, then you have the prefrontal cortex that comes in. So I'll throw this picture back up again, where it is involved in planning, decision making, and then moderating social behavior. So what happens is, in those situations where maybe you go out to dinner with friends and you want to eat something, you maybe want to get seconds of something, but you stop yourself because you're afraid of what someone else might think. So this is that prefrontal cortex. And then this is where we differentiate between conflicting thoughts. So I want something versus I need something. So back to this example of my hand, this is the primitive part where we have the reward circuitry, and then on the outside we have that prefrontal cortex. Well, that reward circuitry has been present since we were in utero. that prefrontal cortex actually doesn't fully form until we're about 30 years old. It's shocking. When I ask in seminars, how long does it normally take to have that fully formed, I get lots of answers. No one ever guesses that it's as old as 30. So we have those very strong tendencies from birth or even earlier, and then we have that conflicting thought with maybe you don't need this like you think you do. So this is, the reward part of the brain. And next we'll move on to the emotion center of the brain. So we have this picture of the amygdala. The amygdala is the emotion center of the brain. So specifically, it is involved in emotional arousal, memory consolidation, and then what we see is a conditioning of the emotional response. So what that means is that if you learned early on in life that something was scary, you have the fear come up when you encounter that situation later on in life. So, for example, if you were running out into the road when you were 3 years old and a parent grabbed you and was startled and upset, you're going to learn that cars are scary. And that is going to continue into the rest of your life as an adult, that you have that knee-jerk reaction when you step out onto a curb and a car almost hits you. In addition, this is where we see OCD, PTSD, and anxiety. So all of those uncomfortable fear emotions in this center. Also within this area, there is the hippocampus. So the hippocampus is where the olfactory bulb is stored. So the olfactory bulb is our sense of smell. So that might seem a little weird. Why are you talking about the sense of smell when we're talking about food? But what's really interesting about the sense of smell is that it is the easiest sense to pass through all of our barriers in our body. So it goes directly to our brain the quickest. So with that, we have memory in this area. Well, you might ask, what is the connection between the olfactory bulb and memory? Well, interestingly enough, our sense of smell is most closely tied to memory of all of our senses. So that's why you can smell something years, decades, even later than that, and automatically bring your brain back to some event, pleasant and unpleasant. And then we have emotions based on those memories in this hippocampus area. So even just recalling some sort of painful event evokes those same memories. And then next we're going to move on to the neurotransmitters, specifically dopamine. Dopamine has a lot of functions. So first, it is that desire and pleasure that we talked about. So that pleasure center in our brain releases that dopamine. It's our feel-good chemical. We also see attachment and love. So I make the joke when someone says, I love cupcakes or pizza or whatever it is, they honestly might love those food items because we form a false sense of attachment and connection. It becomes a friend. And that bond strengthens over time because food never lets us down like people can. We see an integration of thoughts and feelings, so our thoughts and feelings coming together to mesh. And it's also really intricately tied into our mood. So one of the things that we see with deficiencies, we see what we call anhedonia. So anhedonia is a lack of pleasure in things. With that, a lack of dopamine, what we'll do is we will actively seek out things that will increase the dopamine so that we can start to feel normal. We see a lack of focus, some distractibility, a lack of sense of connection with other people, difficulty forming relationships, and we also see a lack of remorse about actions. So things that normally we would feel guilty about doing, we will do to get that fix, to get that dopamine release. Now later we'll probably feel badly about it, but in the moment we will do anything to get that fix. So can you have too much dopamine? Yes. The answer to that statement is yes. So one of the things that they've seen in research in rat studies, not that I advocate rat studies, but when rats are given what we call hyperpalatable foods, so high fat, high sugar foods, over time they develop this, this sense of addiction with these dopamine releases, and they go through withdrawals. So part of that, we also see a flooding of that dopamine actually damaging our dopamine receptors, so it washes them out. And then we start to see an insatiable hunger, a feeling of deprivation. So, and that feeling of deprivation increases the surges of the insatiable hunger. Interestingly enough, we also see less activity in the prefrontal cortex. So as we talked about earlier, that prefrontal cortex is going to tell us that we don't need something. So it's going to inhibit us from doing things. So with less activity in that prefrontal cortex, we are more susceptible to being impulsive. So one of the things that we do see, though, the good news is that we can actually rebuild some of those receptors. So where we have the flooding and less activity in our brain in that area, we can eventually start to rebuild and heal those parts. Serotonin. Okay, so the next neurotransmitter we are going to talk about is serotonin. So serotonin is involved in several different things which are really important to us. So first off, it's in mood regulation. So when we have low levels, we see a lot of depression. So that's where a lot of antidepressants come in. So SSRIs are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So what that means is we have two neurons, and I'll flash a picture here in just a second so you can see it, but two neurons in our brain trying to communicate with one another. And this space between is what we call a synapse. So the chemicals are moving back and forth to communicate things in our brain. And when we don't make enough serotonin, those selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors are preventing the serotonin from being absorbed, but keeping them in that little space, as you can see in this picture. That helps us feel like we have more serotonin, and it helps us feel better. What we also see is an increased sensitivity to pain. Now that sounds really odd. When people are depressed, they feel like they're in pain all the time. And some people might think, oh, just suck it up, you're just being a baby, you're just depressed. But no, legitimately, on a physical level, they feel more pain. We also see insomnia. So particularly in women, men tend to have more hypersomnia or oversleeping, and women have insomnia, which means they don't get enough sleep. We see aggressive behavior, some obsessive compulsive behavior, so obsessing about food in particular can be one of those things. We also see weight gain. Now, it's really hard to tell whether the weight gain is from the serotonin deficiencies in and of themselves, or if it's due to the insomnia and what we see next, the appetite dysregulation. So appetite dysregulation means that we can't really, our bodies are really out of whack with whether it's hungry or full, which we'll talk about sleep too with that. We also see food cravings. Specifically, what's interesting, with low serotonin levels, we see refined carbohydrates cravings. So those actually break down temporarily into serotonin. An interesting fact about serotonin too, that we see that women have less serotonin than men. So where women struggle more often with weight gain and food cravings and some of those other things like insomnia, typically tied to serotonin, might be because we have less serotonin than men. Also, as if that wasn't enough, when we live in high altitudes, like Salt Lake City, we have even less serotonin. So we get kind of a double whammy if we're a woman living at a high altitude. What we also see, the last piece with this too, is that there's typically a low serotonin level in eating disorder patients. So when all of these things together the appetite dysregulation, the food cravings, the obsessive compulsive behavior, the insomnia, and the mood regulation, they can all kind of be tied together into different eating disorders. So next we are going to talk about the HPA axis. HPA stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal. So these are several glands or parts of our brain that are impacted by stress in particular. So it controls our reaction to stress. It does this in a couple different ways. There's a feedback loop, and I'll show you a picture in just a minute with this, but a feedback loop to help calm our bodies down. It's also involved in hunger. So when this HPA axis is being overstimulated, it's trying to calm down our stress, and it's also telling us we're hungry. And we'll talk a little bit more about some of the other pieces of that too. It's also involved in immune system function and mood regulation. It is heavily impacted by sleep, stress, and trauma. So when our stress acts up and we're having insomnia because we are stressed, or if we have a history of trauma, which can impact both of these things, then it can create a lot of problems. So in this picture, you can see that the hypothalamus sends out the signal to the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland tells the adrenal glands that it's time to create adrenaline. Adrenaline is fueling us to get through whatever the stressful time is. But the difficulty with the adrenaline is that it is meant to calm down or to ready our body for battle, for fight or flight. And we are not engaging in a battle with a tiger. We're trying to outrun deadlines at work. So our body is pumping out all of this adrenaline, which then throws sugar into our blood. And because, when we're fighting or fleeing, we need that sugar to be able to escape. Well, we're not using it if we are if we're just trying to outrun deadlines. So we've got all this sugar in our bodies. Well, then we have cortisol come in. And cortisol gets a bad rap, but its function is actually to help us in these situations. So we have the high adrenaline, and cortisol's function is to calm everything down and return it to normal. Well, the way it does that is it increases our blood sugar. So it's kind of counterintuitive because we know we haven't outrun that tiger, but our body doesn't based on that adrenaline response. So we already have the extra sugar in our bloodstream, and then we have more sugar in our bloodstream. Well, to keep it there, it counteracts insulin. So insulin breaks down the sugar, but our body doesn't want to break down the sugar. It wants to keep it available for our muscles. And this can actually lead to insulin resistance, which we'll talk about in just a minute too. It reduces inflammation to keep our body ready for battle. It suppresses our immune function by doing that. It impairs wound healing, and it actually over time starts to metabolize our bone because it's not meant for long-term use. It is meant to just immediately calm down after the adrenaline rush. Well, our body, when we're engaging in emotional stress instead of physical stress, doesn't ever really calm down while we live in stressful lives. Interestingly enough, cortisol is also involved in what we call flashbulb memories. So flashbulb memories happen when a really stressful event comes up, and we need to take a snapshot to remember what's happening, to remember the danger. When this is happening over and over again, it can cause a lot of damage to our hippocampus. Let's talk about sleep. Sleep and stress definitely go hand in hand. So I often ask people, how much sleep do you need? And how much do you get? So the Center for Disease Control has recommended that we get 7 to 9 hours of sleep per night. So roughly that 8-hour rule. The reason they recommend this is that they have, through research, recognized that if we get less than that, we are at risk for a lot of health conditions, heart disease, stroke, and diabetes, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Um, what we also see during this time, if we're not getting enough sleep, is that our hormones aren't able to recalibrate themselves at night. So our body goes through a backup process at night, much like our computer goes through a backup process or an updating process. And when we're not getting enough sleep, we don't have that restful restoration, and our body can break down over time. So how you can tell how much sleep you need would be if you went to bed and woke up without an alarm. So you didn't set an alarm, and that amount of hours that you would need to wake up and feel rested. For most people, it is, at least adults, it is at least 7 hours or around 7 hours. Now, some people can get away with 6, and I don't want to even say get away, but they feel rested after 6. Some people need 9 and everywhere in between. But often what's happening is people in our culture are stressed and they're busy and they go to bed way too late and they wake up way too early. It's recommended that we get hours before midnight too. So research has shown that those hours previous to midnight actually give us more rest and restoration than the hours after midnight. So if you're going to bed at midnight and you're waking up at 6 a.m., you are really depriving yourself of sleep. So back to the hormones and the insulin resistance, what we see over time, particularly with cortisol and adrenaline and then this lack of sleep, is that our body will break down and become resistant to insulin, which then does lead to type 2 diabetes. And that's an epidemic in our country at this point. Over time, we can also see damage to serotonin receptor sites. So, we talked about those little receptors where serotonin is absorbed in our body. Well, those can be washed away if we have sleep deprivation and high stress. And then over time, it can lead to adrenal fatigue. So adrenal fatigue means that our body has pumped out so much adrenaline that it just can't do it anymore, and we shut down. Our body taps out and says, I can't do this anymore. And that can have really difficult long-term consequences for us, chronic fatigue, things like that. So what do you do about all of this? It's so difficult because, as I mentioned, we do live in a very stressful culture. We're all very, very busy. So the best thing is to try and keep things in balance as much as possible. So we want to look at all of our needs. We want to look at our physical needs. Are we getting enough sleep, as I just talked about? Are we getting adequate nutrition? Are we getting enough meals throughout the day? Are we drinking enough water? Are we taking our vitamins? Are we getting enough exercise? So those are all of our physical needs. Do we have our emotional needs met? Do we have people to talk to? Do we have a supportive environment? Are we safe? That's a huge emotional need, and many people live in a relationship or in a home that isn't safe. Our mental needs need to be taken care of. So that would refer to mental stimulation, doing things that are intellectually stimulating, books, museums, documentaries, just learning new things that help to keep our mind sharp. Our social needs, do we have friends? Do we get out and do things with them? Do we have people that we can rely on, particularly outside of our family? Often what happens as adults is we put all of our energy into our families and we don't have our needs met in other ways. 1 or 2 people can't meet all of our needs, so we need to have other kind of tools in our basket, so to speak. Recreational. Do we do things for fun? Do we have hobbies? I cannot tell you how many people I have talked to over the years when I ask them, what do you like to do? They say, I don't know. I don't have any hobbies. Well, the greatest thing about being an adult is we get to do whatever we want. So spend some time really cultivating your hobbies. One of the things that I hear a lot too is, well, I don't have anyone to do those things with. There are lots of groups, lots of activities where you can find other people who have those same interests. Definitely with the internet now, it's so easy to connect with other people. And then spiritual. Are your spiritual needs met? And that doesn't necessarily mean religion. It just means a connection to something bigger than yourself. So that could mean a lot of things. It could mean meditation and yoga practice, or it could mean going to church, or it could mean a combination of things. It could mean just prayer in general. So getting all of those needs met really helps keep us balanced. So when we are faced with stress, we are less likely to go to something like food to deal with the stress because it just doesn't have as big of an impact on us. So when it comes to emotional eating in general, there is one technique that I think is very, very helpful for dealing with stress and being able to separate emotions from food. It's called the 5Ds. So what you would do, you would use this hunger and fullness scale, so 1 to 10. A 1 is I am so famished I'm going to pass out, and a 10 is I am so full I'm going to be sick. A 5 is about how we feel, maybe an hour after eating. We're not really hungry, we're not really full, we're not necessarily even thinking about food at that time. We really want to try and stay between a 4 and a 6. So, maybe even a 3 or a 7, but we don't really want to go beyond that. We don't want to get to the point where we're too hungry, which leads us to overeat, and we don't want to get to the point where we're too full, which leads to some painful emotions around food. So the way the 5Ds work, we determine if we are physically or emotionally hungry. So going back to that 1 to 10 scale, if I am a 5 or higher on that scale, I know it's not physical hunger. I know it's emotional hunger. So I'll use the rest of the Ds. Delay. For 10 minutes, delay. Don't eat. Distract yourself with something else, something non-food related. Distance yourself by getting away from the food. And after 10 minutes, if you still really feel like you need to eat, go ahead and allow yourself to have it. But sit at the table. Don't eat in front of the TV or in front of the computer while you're doing something else. Sit at the table. Use a plate or a bowl. Don't eat out of the package. And really allow yourself to enjoy the food. While you are delaying, distracting, and distancing yourself, I want you to also ask yourself a few of the following questions. What else is going on? If I'm not physically hungry, what prompted this desire to eat? It could be stress. It could be that we saw food. It could be that there's a sense of reward coming with it. I've had a hard day. I deserve this cupcake. So figure out what else is going on. And you might have to backtrack hours or even days earlier, because what happens a lot is we go through a cycle of thoughts and emotions, and it may take a couple of days for us to recognize what's going on. So ask yourself what else is going on. Ask yourself what you really need to do to deal with those emotions without using food. So if the emotion that prompted it is stress, that stress is trying to tell you something. If the emotion that prompted it is loneliness, it's trying to tell you something. So the stress is telling you, hey, you've got too much on your plate. You've got too much going on. You need to slow down. Let's prioritize. Let's figure out what we can get rid of here. If it's loneliness, hey, you need other people. You need to be around people or talk to people. That cupcake isn't going to give you what you need. It might feel like it in the moment, but long term, it's not going to give you the sense of connection you're desiring. So in that moment, really kind of sit with the emotion. What we'll also see is just by acknowledging it, recognizing it, and figuring out where it's coming from, it can really decrease in intensity. So 5Ds: determine, delay, distract, distance, and decide. Use this the next time you feel like eating emotionally. So for the last piece of this video, I am going to walk you through some stress management exercises. So first, we're going to start with a grounding exercise called the 5 senses. So go ahead and make yourself comfortable. Put both feet on the floor. Sit with your arms at your side, hands in your lap. I want you to close your eyes. Take 2 big, deep breaths in your nose and out your mouth. In your nose, out your mouth. As you continue to breathe, I want you to notice what you hear. Notice the sound of my voice, maybe the sound of the breathing in the room, any other noises. Just listen as you breathe in and out. I want you to notice what you might smell. Maybe your fabric softener, your clothing, your lotion, your shampoo, or maybe nothing at all. Just notice what you smell as you breathe in and out. Notice what your body feels like in the chair. Is it soft or is it hard? Is it comfortable or uncomfortable? Notice what your skin feels like with your clothes. Breathe in and out. Now go ahead and open your eyes. Notice what you see. Notice any colors, textures, shapes, light and dark. Breathe in and out. I love this exercise because you can do it anywhere. You don't even have to close your eyes. You know, if you're in the middle of the grocery store and you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed, just think about everything you see, or 5 things that you see even. 2 things that you hear, 1 thing that you smell, 2 things that you feel. And just taking those deep breaths will help relax you. Now I'm going to walk you through a guided imagery exercise. So go ahead and take that comfortable position again, closing your eyes, and taking those 2 big deep breaths in your nose and out your mouth. In your nose and out your mouth. I want you to imagine yourself on a little path as you walk to the beach. And as you get to the sand, take off your shoes. Feel the sand between your toes. It feels warm under your feet. And as you walk to the water, you can feel the breeze on your skin, the sun on your face. You can hear the birds in the distance and the crash of the waves. I want you to walk into the water, feeling that warm water on your toes. Walking in a little bit further, you feel it over your foot, your feet, Going in a little bit deeper, it's up to your calves. And we're just going to stop when it gets to your knees. Feeling the gentle wave crash against your legs. As you stand there and soak up the sun, smell that briny sea air. Feel the warm breeze on your skin. And just allow yourself to relax. Feel any stress you may have felt just melt into the water and wash away. As you continue to breathe, just take care of anything that you might need to take care of here at the beach before you come back. Go ahead and turn around and walk back to that path. And gently allow yourself to stir and come back to our session here tonight. Take one more big deep breath as you open your eyes. Breathe in and out. So our last exercise for relaxation will be progressive muscle relaxation. So one more time, just take that comfortable position in your chair. Close your eyes. And take those 2 big deep breaths in your nose and out your mouth. In your nose and out your mouth. I want you to just start with your feet, with your toes. Feel all the tension in your body build in your toes. I want you to squeeze them tight and hold them as you breathe in and out. Release those toes. Move up into your lower legs. Squeeze the lower leg muscles. Hold them as you breathe in and out. Releasing those legs. And then move up into your thighs. Squeezing those thigh muscles. Holding them tight as you breathe in and out, releasing those thighs. Move up into your glutes or your bum muscles. Squeeze those muscles. Breathe in and out, releasing those glutes. Move up into your stomach. Squeezing and tensing those stomach muscles. Breathe in and out, releasing your stomach. Then move to your hands. Squeeze your hands into tight fists. Hold them as you breathe in and out, releasing your hands. Moving up into your arms. Squeezing and tightening your arms. Breathe in and out, releasing your arms. Move up into your shoulders and your upper back. Squeezing and tightening those shoulders and back. Breathe in and out, releasing your shoulders and back. Then I want you to tense up your entire body, holding those muscles tight as tight can be. I want you to hold them for 2 breaths. So breathe in Keep holding, breathe out. One more time, breathe in. Breathe out. I want you to just move anything that needs to be moved. Roll your shoulders and your neck. Shake out any muscles that might still have some tension. And take one more big deep breath as you open your eyes. In and out. So I hope you've enjoyed these exercises. The senses are really great just to ground us. The guided imagery is amazing because our brain really can't think about worry thoughts and pictures at the same time. And the progressive muscle relaxation exercise is wonderful to get that physical release of stress that we need sometimes. A couple other things that are really helpful: taking vacations. You know, a lot of people will say, I don't have time or I don't have money. And there are so many things that you can do just for the day to just get a break that don't cost any money, or, you know, inexpensive vacations that you can take locally. So really consider that. You know, there are so many people who might go years without taking a vacation, and that's just a shame. And then downtime. Really enjoy downtime. We are so busy. We are so overscheduled that very rarely do we take enough time just to be, just to relax. So those are my picks for things that we can do to reduce stress in addition to creating that balance. I hope you have found this video helpful. Please reach out if you have any questions. You can visit us on our website, by phone, or email. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great evening.